Presidents and Civil Liberties. How have our presidents done in terms of protecting civil liberties and advancing the rights of American citizens? Hello, I'm Sam Walker, author of the book Presidents and Civil Liberties, From Wilson to Obama. Today I'd like to talk about President Woodrow Wilson. Now, Wilson is highly regarded as one of the near-great presidents. When historians rank the presidents, he typically comes in 7th or 8th place. That's mainly because of his outstanding record in domestic politics. But when we look at civil liberties, he actually has one of the worst records of all the modern presidents. There are really three topics where his record is very poor. First, during World War I, freedom of speech. Second, on civil rights. And third, on women's suffrage. When the United States went to war in April of 1917, the Wilson administration engaged in a massive suppression of dissent. It's one of the worst violations of freedom of speech and press in American history. Some of the leading anti-war spokesperson, the famous anarchist Emma Goldman and the Socialist Party leader Eugene Debs, were convicted under the Espionage Act. Emma Goldman was deported to the Soviet Union. Eugene Debs was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The post office under Wilson banned all anti-war publications from the mail. Most important was the magazine The Masses, which before the war was one of the most important political and cultural radical publications in the country. The Civil Liberties Bureau, forerunner of today's ACLU, its publications were banned from the mail from time to time. And in August of 1918, the Justice Department raided the Civil Liberties Bureau offices and seized all its records. Looked like they were going to be prosecuted under the Espionage Act, but fortunately that did not happen. President Wilson bore personal responsibility for these actions. Complaints about the violations of freedom of speech and freedom of the press reached his desk. There were letters. You can see these letters today in his presidential papers. And he turned all of those complaints aside. In his view of progressivism and reform, there just wasn't any place for really active dissent. The second major issue involves racial justice. Soon after Wilson became president, at a cabinet meeting in 1913, one of the cabinet members proposed segregating the federal employees in all of the federal agencies. Woodrow Wilson agreed. And when the NAACP protested, he simply turned aside their protests. He wrote them back and said, well, he thinks it's really for the best of everyone involved. The third issue involves women's suffrage. The campaign for a constitutional amendment to grant women the right to vote was the major women's rights issue of the time. Woodrow Wilson was opposed to it. In fact, on many occasions, he really didn't even want to talk about it. But there were really sustained protests, pickets of the White House led by Alice Paul, leader of the National Women's Party, all through 1917. Paul herself was arrested. She staged a hunger strike in jail. Then early in 1918, Wilson changed his mind and largely for political reasons came out in support of the women's suffrage amendment. So when you look at the three major issues, he has a terrible record on freedom of speech and press and on racial justice. And his record is very, very mixed, and we can really call it a weak record on women's suffrage. Again, this is not the record of someone who should be considered, one of the near-great presidents in our history. In some other talks, I'll talk about some of the other presidents and their records on civil liberties, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, and others. Thank you.